Tamara and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about birth order. Did you know that the order that you're born in can affect your personality type? So let's talk about some things that can get in the way of that perfect personality type. So birth order can result in positive and negative traits, and it's only one small piece in the puzzle of how your personality develops. So what are some things that can blur the lines? The first thing is your temperament. Genetics play a big role in your personality, and half of your personality is based on temperament, which can blur the lines or trump your birth order. There can also be a shift in positions. So the firstborn child is expected to succeed at whatever the parents deem as the most important parts of their family. And if that child is unable to do that, it could cause that kid not to have the normal traits that a firstborn would have. So if you have a first and secondborn child who are different genders, then they can both end up acting like firstborn children. Or if there's more value placed on one gender over the other, then that second child could end up acting more like the firstborn. Let's say you have a kid that's extremely gifted and talented, then a lot of the pressures that a firstborn child would have would be placed on that child. Like, let's say you have a kid that could be an Olympic gymnast. Also, if you have a special needs child, that can throw the order of birth personality traits off as well. And then finally, so if there are 5 or more years between kids, then it starts the birth order process all over again. So now the kid that was the youngest becomes the middle, but even though that child is the middle child, they're still probably going to exhibit the traits of a last-born child because there's 5 or more years in between. So let's talk about the traits of a firstborn child. Firstborn children tend to be reliable, structured, conscientious, controlling, achievers, more cautious. They're thought of as natural leaders, ambitious and responsible. The oldest child is only the oldest for a short period of time, so can often show similar traits to an only child. Being the oldest of a group of siblings may bring out traits like they could be people pleasers, very organized and prompt. Conformist, they may be bossy or know-it-alls, may be overachievers or controlling, but they can be compliant and nurturing. They're modeling after their parents, so they're kind of like mini adults. So they strive to be the best in everything they do. So when a child is born and has no siblings, they're modeling after adults. So they're often going to emulate those behaviors. The oldest child for a while has no competition, and they can tend to be kind of surrogate parents for the other children that come along in a protective and nurturing way. Since they're the parent's first child, they can be sort of an experiment to the new parents because they're using a mixture of instinct and trial and error. This can cause parents to go by the book, be extremely attentive, tougher on rules, and be more extreme for the tiniest of behaviors or things. This might cause the oldest child to be a perfectionistic, always trying to please their parents. Personally, I think it's the toughest to be the oldest. I think they have the hardest in line, even though other people will say that they think their role is the hardest. I think hands down, it's harder to be that oldest child. So it's a guarantee that the firstborn and the secondborn are going to be different. So let's talk about the middle child. Haven't you heard of middle child syndrome? So middle children often have characteristics like people pleasers. They can be somewhat rebellious, thrive on friendship, or have a large social circle. And they can be peacemakers. They can be thought of as social butterflies and obsessed with fairness. So middleborns don't have the rights of the oldest children, but they don't have the privileges of the youngest child. So these characteristics show up more so in families where there are 3 siblings. When there is more than 3 children, then it changes those dynamics. So what happens is, I often have seen families where there's 4, 5, 6 children, where the middle child is super calm, super easygoing, very go with the flow. So what happens is, let's say you have 3 middle children, what happens is the first and the third will be more similar in personality than the one that's actually in the middle. So the middle child can be very good at mediating, independent, but they may have a sense that life is unfair. They may feel unloved or squeezed out by the other siblings. They can be generous and sociable, but they can be very competitive. They may separate themselves by having different interests than their older sibling. They may think that the oldest and youngest children are the parents' favorites. So they may engage in attention-seeking behaviors. As a result of being in the middle, they may become very good at negotiating and also compromise. They tend to lean on their friends more because their parents are more focused on the oldest and the youngest child. A couple might raise their second child with a little bit less of an iron fist than they did with the first child because they've already navigated that territory. The first child is always in line to be the first at everything, the first new experience. So they tend to be more lenient with the second child, or a little bit more relaxed. But they also could be less attentive to the second child because now the youngest child is needing their attention more. But they don't overreact and freak out as much as they did with the first child. This might cause the second-born child to be less perfectionistic, but more of a people pleaser because of getting less attention than the firstborn child. The middle child often feels a little bit left out because they're not the firstborn and they're not the thirdborn, which can cause them to have some identity issues. Or not so much as an identity issues, but kind of wonder more about their identity. They often make their mark among their peers since their parents' focus is more on the first and the last child. So middle children play off of their firstborn sibling that's right in front of them. If they are the opposite gender, that can also play a role. So let's talk about the last-born children. The youngest-born child tends to be the most free-spirited because their parents relax more and more as more children come along. So the baby of the family tends to be fun-loving, uncomplicated. They could be a little bit more manipulative, outgoing, attention-seeking, and self-centered. Sometimes the last-born can kind of be like the comedians of the family. They're thought to be free-spirited, charming, and risk-takers. The baby is looked at as more carefree and the spoiled one of the family. They usually get away with more than the oldest children did or the oldest child did because they can't do as much or they can't handle as much as the oldest child always can, and they tend to get away with a lot more because the parents are more tired for one thing, and the parents may not be as strict as they were originally with the firstborn. They're often funny, silly, they can be very creative. They may feel more inferior, as if everybody's more capable than they are. So that could cause them to step up to the occasion, especially even later in life, to want to take more of a leadership role. They can be very competitive. They may get bored easily. They can be friendly and outgoing with a great sense of humor. They may expect others to take care of them or take responsibility for them. And they might be very idealistic. Parents are less cautious, they're more lenient, so the babies of the family are less rule-oriented. They get a lot of attention and they may wrestle the spotlight away from others if they want to. Some families, though, the last-born kid might feel a little bit resentful that they're not taken more seriously and become more responsible like the oldest child, or they could become more social like the middle child. Now, being an only child is going to be similar to the firstborn, but usually super. Being an only child is a very unique position in the family. So without any siblings to get along with or have to share with, the only child gets all the parents' attention and resources, not just for a short period of time like the firstborn, but forever. That's why sometimes only children can be called super firstborns. Oldest children have the privilege and kind of sometimes the burden of having all their parents' expectations on their shoulders. Only children tend to be perfectionistic, mature for their age, conscientious, and leaders. They can often be very private in nature, have close relationships with their parents, born natural leaders, may relate better to adults than their peers, have a high level of self-control and get along very well with adults. Now they can be demanding and they can be self-absorbed, and they may learn to divide and conquer their parents to get what it is that they want. They may feel like they're getting treated unfairly if they don't get their way. They may be very sensitive but are often very mature and dependable, and sometimes they like being the center of attention. Twins. So what about twins? With twins, some people say the rules don't apply. Twins are a special focus for their parents, and there's typically less competition between identical twins. Fraternal twins, however, might act more like regular siblings. So twins are thought to be a family within a family that operates independently from birth order rules. A twin will more than likely act more like a firstborn or a youngest. Since twins are thought of as a single unit, they separate themselves from the traditional family and have their own special position. I think what's interesting about twins is, let's say they don't have any siblings at all. I think they're going to fit a lot of the characteristics of only children because their parents haven't had any experiences before them with children, and so there's still that by the book, that fear, that, oh my gosh, what are we doing? How do we do it? Expectations are up here. They might be a little bit more spoiled in some ways too because they're getting a lot of attention. I think one of the hardest parts about being a twin is they get attention, especially if they're identical twins. They get attention everywhere they go, and sometimes that can be really tough and change some of the dynamics. It can also make them feel more social pressures or maybe have a stronger need for space than other people might need because they've sort of lived their life in this natural spotlight where people are always coming at them. The attention can be constant. So I think sometimes twins can sort of push people away a little bit because it's like, like I've been getting all this attention my whole life. I don't want any more attention. Give me some room. Because I think twins are often having to put on a show for people because they get asked the same questions thousands of times, so you have to do a lot of pretending like you haven't heard it 100 times. They have to be nice even when they feel like they don't want to be bothered or they don't want the attention. You sort of learn to be an actor or an actress because you have to be polite when you really just... Some twins like the attention and some twins don't. They've sort of had their space intruded their whole lives, so they may not be quality time people on the 5 love languages, that's for sure, because they've had their space infiltrated their whole life. So that's just a little bit of extra information on what I've observed from watching twins. So I hope you enjoyed my video. If you need some advice on something, like you're having a problem, feel free to send that problem in to me at the email address listed below. Send in your questions and you may see it featured on a future video. Thanks for watching my video. Bye!